Welcome to Fresh Start. Are you ready for health? This module, we're going to talk about how to read labels and shop smarter. If you don't have a copy in front of you, you can download the label reading guidelines from the left sidebar. Notice the label reading calculator on the bottom. This helps you estimate quickly in the grocery store without needing to do full calculations. As we've talked about in the prior modules, we want you to eat more of those plant-based whole foods on the right, which lead to health, and less of those animal products and processed foods. The very best foods don't have any labels. They are found in that produce department. Remember, it's recommended that you have at least 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. 9 or more are even better. And it's recommended that you have green leafy vegetables every day in that mix. So let's go through the label reading steps together. First of all, we want to point out that there's 2 types of labels that you'll be finding. There's the original label that you'll see here on the left, and the newer label that in many cases will be replacing the original label. Both of these have some benefits. For example, in the original label, they calculate for you the calories from fat, which you'll see in a moment is important to know. The new label tells us how many grams of added sugars, which the old label doesn't. Looking at a label, the things we want to see are, number 1, we're going to talk about fats. 1A is the total fat content, which we want to be 20% or less of the total calories. 1B, we want to see if there are any unhealthy fats. Those are saturated fat, trans fat, and cholesterol. We'd like there to be none. Number 2, we want to look at sodium density. Ideally, we want that sodium density in milligrams to be roughly equivalent or less than the number of calories. If it's a condiment, something you're using in very small quantities just to add flavor to the food, it can go as high as 4 times the calories. Number 3, we want to read the ingredients. Number 4, we want to look at sugar, in particular added sugar, which we want to be minimal. The total calories of added sugar should be less than 5% of the total calories. Number 5, we want to look at fiber. In particular, we want to be sure that the grains are whole grains, and we want to see that carbohydrate to fiber ratio less than or equal to 5. So let's walk through this step by step. We're looking at an original label, and you'll see right at the top the calories are 230 per serving, and the calories from fat are 72. Remember, we want the fat calories to be 20% or less of the total calories. So let's do the math. 72 calories from fat divided by 230 total calories times 100%, 31.3% of the total calories coming from fat. That's well above 20%. Remember back from prior modules, we talked about the number of calories per gram of fat. We said that about a thimbleful of fat is 1 gram and contains about 9 calories. The new label doesn't tell you how many calories are from fat, so we need to calculate that. But we can see that we still have that 230 calories total, but we have 8 grams of fat. So 8 grams of fat times 9 calories per gram is 72 calories. Then we do the same math. 72 calories from fat divided by 230 total calories times 100% gives us that same number, 31.3% of the calories coming from fat. And as we said, that's well beyond the 20%. Now that doesn't mean that you won't buy this item. You may want to compare it to another item. If you're going to buy something in this category, you'll want to look for the one that has the best nutritional value overall. It may be that the fats in this item are due to nuts, which are a whole food and naturally are high in fat. And that may be something you choose to eat. So this isn't an absolute number. This is a comparison to give you an idea of where things are nutritionally. So we'll keep going down the list. The next thing to look at is unhealthy fats. We want to look particularly for saturated fat, trans fat, and cholesterol. And when we look over at the label, we see 1 gram of saturated fat, no trans fats, no cholesterol. Again, you want to compare this to something else. 1 gram of saturated fat compared to another product with 3 grams of saturated fat may lead you to choose the item with less saturated fat. Now let's move to step number 2, sodium density. In this case, we still have 230 calories per serving. We look down at the sodium, we see 160 milligrams of sodium in one serving. So 160 is well less than 230, so we're well under that 1-to-1 ratio. Let's talk a minute about sodium. We showed you this slide in a prior module that the leading dietary causes of death and disability globally are too much salt and sodium, as well as too little of those plant-based whole foods that we've been encouraging you to eat. These together account for 22% of global deaths. Added salt or sodium to foods accounts for as many as 4 million deaths a year globally and up to 100,000 lives per year in the US. Reducing the salt is actually more effective and less expensive than taking many of the medications that we give for blood pressure, and without the side effects. With our blood pressure medications, we try to get your blood pressure down to 120/80. However, your ideal blood pressure is below 110/70. We've learned that trying to get your pressure down to 110/70 with medications causes way too many side effects. However, with a healthy diet, you can oftentimes reach that level of blood pressure naturally without medications. We want to reduce your overall sodium intake to about 1,500 to 2,000 milligrams a day. And if you remember, that's about what we should be eating in calories per day. That's where we get our 1-to-1 ratio. To do this, in addition to adding salt, we want to avoid those heavily processed and salty foods. Here they are, the things that are really high in sodium: the breads and processed meats, the soups, and poultry. Even organic poultry is usually injected with salt water to plump them up and make them pink, and then you buy that salt water by the pound. The only way to be sure that you don't have poultry injected with salt solution is to buy it directly from the farmer. For poultry, there's no label required to tell you how much salt has been injected. We'd also like you to get rid of that salt shaker. Learn how to use those herbal seasonings instead. If you feel like you still need a little of that salt, wait and put it on at the end. Don't cook it into the food, just a little bit on the surface so you can get that taste while you're eating the food. Another thing you can do, as long as you have good kidney function, is to use a potassium chloride salt substitute, such as no salt or new salt. This gives you that metallic taste that we enjoy from sodium chloride, but without the sodium load. If you have any questions, be sure you check with your medical provider to be sure this is safe for you. So we look at this label and we see the calories are 68 and the sodium is 77 milligrams. So that's roughly equivalent to 1-to-1. It's a little higher, but not by much. Step 3, we want to look at the ingredients. Ingredients are listed in order of weight. Ideally, we'd like a short list of ingredients of just a few things that are all plant-based whole foods. As you read through the ingredients, you want to ask yourself, can you easily pronounce them? Are they chemical names? You want to look for unhealthy fats. Those would be from animal fats, palm oil, or coconut oil. Is sugar in the top 3? Now, the manufacturers oftentimes will break sugar up into multiple names. If they were just listed as sugar, it would be in the top 3, but when they're broken up, the added sweetener is lower on the list. So you want to look for things like dextrose, fructose, maltose, sucrose, honey, and molasses. This label, for example, has honey, has molasses, and sugar by itself is number 3 on the list. Are there camouflaged ingredients? Things like whey or casein, which are milk proteins. The next step, we again need to remember that 1 gram of sugar, a thimbleful, contains 4 calories. In the original label, they only tell you how many grams of sugar, not how many grams of sugar are added. We really want to know the added sugar because many of the foods we eat have sugar intrinsic in them. If they're plant-based whole foods, the intrinsic sugar is just fine. But since we can't tell that on the original label, we do the best we can, trying to keep those total calories from sugar less than about 5% of the calories. So we have 1 gram of sugar times 4 calories per gram divided by 230 calories overall in the item times 100%. And on this label we have 1.7% calories from total sugar, well under the 5%. So we're in good shape. We can look at the new label and we see that they've actually given us the total sugars as well as the added sugars. So in this case, we can focus on those added sugars. 10 grams of sugar, 4 calories per gram, that's 40 calories. 40 calories divided by that 230 times 100%. In this case, we've got 17% added calories from sugar, which is over that 5%. So we might want to look for another item. Next step, we want to look at the carbohydrate over fiber ratio. Ideally, we want this to be 5 or less. So we see that total carbohydrates, 13 grams, divided by 3 grams of fiber, and that's 4.3. Remember, we said that things that were 5 or less could be eaten in that 3/4 plate because the calorie density is low enough because of all the fiber and water that we can fill up with those without worrying about getting an excess calorie load. However, if things are over 5, they should go into that 1/4 plate because they are more dense in calories because there's less fiber, and you can overeat your calories more easily with those. Now it's time to do a label reading exercise. So let's look at this label together. This is a can of black beans. So what's step 1? Looking at the fat. So we have 110 total calories and 10 calories from fat. So we divide 10 by 110 times 100%. That's 9% of the calories coming from fat. That's well under 20%. So we're in good shape. Then we want to look at the unhealthy fats. There's no saturated fat, no trans fat, no cholesterol. We're in good shape. Step 2, we want to look at the sodium density. So we have 370 milligrams of sodium and 110 calories. That's well beyond the 1-to-1 ratio. And if you look at the ingredients, you see salt listed. Step 3, we want to look at those ingredients. We see that there's prepared black beans, water, and salt. And that salt is why the sodium is so high. Step 4, we want to look at sugars. There's no sugars in the beans, so we don't need to do that calculation. Step 5, we want to look at the carbohydrate fiber ratio. 19 grams of carbohydrate divided by 7 grams of fiber, that's 2.7, well under 5. So overall, this can of beans is good except for the sodium. Can we do better? Well, let's take a look at this can of beans. The calories are the same, 110. The sodium is 130 milligrams, much closer to the 1-to-1 ratio. And when you look at the label, there's sea salt added. Now you really don't need sea salt. Sea salt, pink salt, Himalayan salt, those are all gimmicks. It's still sodium. So there's one better yet. Here's one with no salt added. 110 calories, 10 milligrams of sodium, well under that 1-to-1 ratio. And when you look at the ingredients, no salt added. So this is the best of the series. Go on and do the next label reading exercise, and we'll look at that together. So this example is our beloved macaroni and cheese that we all grew up on. This label's a little bit more complicated. We want to look at several things before we actually dive into the rules. First of all, I want you to notice that there are 3 servings per container. When you have macaroni and cheese, how much do you eat? Yeah, I eat the whole box. 1 box apiece for everybody in the family. So just keep that in mind as we do these calculations. We also want to point out that there's 2 columns here. There's a column for the dry materials in the box as they're packaged, and a column for eating them as prepared according to the instructions. Very rarely does anybody eat the dried cheese and the uncooked macaroni. You might chew on them a little bit, but generally not. So we want to focus on the prepared column. Step 1, yep, we want to look at the fats. And look at the total calories, 400. Now remember, if you eat that whole box, you're getting 1,200 calories, and if you're eating 1,500 to 2,000 calories a day, that's quite a wallop in one meal. And we see that there are 170 calories from fat. So that 170 divided by 400 times 100% is 42.5% of the calories coming from fat. And that's predominantly from the cheese, the butter, and the milk that you've added. That's well beyond the 20%. And then if we look at the unhealthy fats, we see saturated fat, 1.5 grams, cholesterol, 10 milligrams, and this isn't surprising because you get saturated fat and cholesterol from animal products. That's from the dairy. Step 2, we want to look at the sodium. And we see 570 milligrams of sodium to those 400 calories, and that's a fair bit beyond that 1-to-1 ratio. Plus, if you're going to eat that whole box by yourself, that's your whole sodium load for the day. Step 3, let's look at those ingredients. The first ingredient is enriched macaroni product, meaning highly processed. They strip out the fiber, they strip out the vitamins, and then they turn around and give you the vitamins back as chemicals. And then they add cheese sauce and milk fat and milk protein and sodium here and salt here. And then the yellow dye. There's a lot of things on that label that you'd really do better without. Step 4. Yes, we're going to look at the sugars. So 7 grams of sugar, remember 4 calories per gram, that gives us 28 calories from sugar. 28 calories divided by 400 total calories times 100%, that's 7%. So that's a little bit above our 5% limit. Step 5, yes, the carbohydrate fiber ratio. And we do this math, 48 grams of carbohydrate, 1 gram of fiber, 48. Way beyond that 5. So this food, because it is so concentrated in calories, you want to limit that to no more than a quarter of the plate if you eat it at all. I know that makes us sad because that's all something we really enjoyed growing up with. Well, let's look at this whole grain pasta without all the cheese and additives to it, just to see if there might be a better choice. And then we add to this whole grain pasta maybe a cashew cream sauce. It won't be macaroni and cheese, but it's very satisfying. Or maybe you want to make pasta primavera. Let's look at this label together. Step 1, we want to look at the calories from fat. So we have 15 calories from fat divided by 200 total calories times 100%. That's 9%. So that's under that 20% by quite a bit. We see that there are no saturated fats, trans fats, or cholesterol. Step 2, we want to look at the sodium. 10 milligrams of sodium, that's well under that 1-to-1 ratio with the 200 calories. Step 3, we want to look at the ingredients. Now notice the front of the box says whole grain, and to be categorized as whole grain, you have to have at least 51% whole grain. So the first ingredient indeed is whole grain durum wheat flour, but then they have additional semolina and durum wheat flour, but it's processed. It doesn't say whole grain. And then they add some fiber back in. Definitely better than the macaroni and cheese. Step 4, we want to look at the sugar calories. 2 grams of sugar times 4 calories is 8. 8 divided by the 200 total calories times 100% gives us 4% of the calories coming from sugar. That's under that 5%. And we didn't see any sugar listed on the ingredients, so that's intrinsic sugar. That's the sugar that's in the grain itself. Step 5, we want to look at that carbohydrate fiber ratio. So it's 41 grams divided by 6, 6.8, which is still above 5 because it's only 51% whole grain, but it's much better than that 48 from the macaroni and cheese. So this would still be limited to that quarter plate, and then you want to smother it, fill the rest of that plate with those healthy fruits and vegetables to make a nice pasta primavera. So if you're going to eat a pasta dish, that whole grain pasta is definitely an improvement over the macaroni and cheese. But is there yet a better choice? So this box is completely whole grain. You look at the ingredients, whole grain durum wheat flour, and when we look at the fiber ratio, indeed 39 divided by 7 is much closer to 5. It's not below 5 because this is still processed to a degree, minimally processed compared to the macaroni and cheese, but yet it's more concentrated in calories, so you still want to limit that a bit to that quarter plate. So let's take a look at the next label reading exercise before we go ahead. So let's look at this legume pasta. When we look at the calories, 200, we have to calculate the fat calories. So there's 3 grams of fat times 9 calories is 27. 27 divided by those 200 calories total times 100% gives us 13.5%. So we're under that 20% with our fat. When we look at the types of fat, there is a little bit of saturated fat from the soy, but no trans fats or cholesterol. When we look at the sodium, there's no sodium. When we look at the ingredients, the only thing there is organic soybeans. These are ground up into a flour and used to make the pasta. When we look at the sugars, we see 3 grams of sugar, but 0 grams of added sugars. So that 3 grams of sugar is the intrinsic sugar in the soy. So we don't worry about that. Then we look at that fiber ratio, 21 grams divided by 12 grams of fiber. The legumes being so high in fiber, that's 1.75. So this pasta you can fill up on. You can put it in that 3/4 plate and eat it without worrying about getting excess calories because that fiber will fill you up. Let's do another exercise together. So the next label we want to look at is Nature's Own 100% whole wheat bread. In the Fill Up with Fiber module, we gave you a bread comparison sheet, and this was in one of the better breads if you're out there looking for a bread. So let's look at the label together. Step 1, we're going to look at the fat. So calories from fat are 10. Total calories are 100. That's pretty easy math, 10%, well under the 20%. When we look at unhealthy fats, no saturated fat, no trans fat, no cholesterol. Next step, we look at the sodium. And we see there's 150 milligrams of sodium to the 100 calories. So that's a little high. We'd like it less. So we'll keep this in mind as we compare breads. Step 3, we want to look at the ingredients. So we look at the ingredients and we see the first ingredient indeed is stone ground whole wheat flour. But we see they've also added brown sugar and salt and oil. Things we'd prefer not to see on the label. Step 4, we look at the calories from sugar. So we have 3 grams of sugar times 4 calories per gram, so there's 12 calories. 12 calories divided by that 100 calories total gives us 12%. So this is above that 5% guideline that we're looking at. And that's because of that brown sugar that was added to this bread. Step 5, we look at the carbohydrate fiber ratio. 10 divided by 2, it is 5. That's because it's 100% whole wheat. So there's a lot of fiber in this, which keeps that ratio down. So right on that borderline, but 5 or less, you can eat this bread without too much limit, but I wouldn't overdo it. So this is better than most breads. It's a little high in sodium, and it's high in those added sugars, as well as that added oil. Here's the best that you're going to find on the market. One of these sprouted grain breads, like that Ezekiel Bread that we talked about before. So Ezekiel Bread has 80 calories per serving and 5 calories from fat. 5 divided by 80 times 100% is 6.2%, well under the 20%. When we look at the unhealthy fats, we see no saturated fat, trans fat, or cholesterol. When we look at the sodium, we see none. And when we look at the ingredients, it's just these grains that are sprouted, ground into that flour, and used to bake the bread. There's no added sugars, no added oil. When you do the carbohydrate to fiber ratio, it's right at 5 as well, so it makes the cut barely. Again, that's because it's processed, so it's still a little bit more concentrated in calories than it would be if you ate the whole grain sprouts by themselves. Remember, it doesn't have to be Ezekiel Bread. At Kroger, they have their own Simple Truth brand. Aldi's has theirs. Look in the freezer for the sprouted grain breads. So let's move on to label reading exercise number 5. So we've talked about a better can of beans, better pasta option, a better bread option. Is there a better cracker? Well, we've talked about the Wausau crackers before, so let's look at their label. There are 5 calories from fat divided by 60 total calories, which gives us 8%, well under the 20%. We see none of the unhealthy fats. When we look at that sodium, it's a bit high, 100 to 60. A little bit over that 1-to-1, approaching 2-to-1, and that's because they added salt in the ingredients. But if you compare this to the saltine crackers, it's going to be much lower. When we look at the ingredients together, we see the whole grain rye flour, the wheat bran. We see some good things there, except for the salt. There are no sugars, so we don't need to do that calculation. And when we look at that carbohydrate to fiber ratio, it's really pretty good, 2.8. That's why these are good snack crackers. They fill you up with the fiber without giving you that calorie load. So you could use these with some of that low-fat hummus or some salsa for a healthy snack. Are you up to doing one more? Do label reading number 6. So our last label to look at together is this frozen broccoli. So step 1, we want to look at the calories from fat. There are none, and there are no unhealthy fats listed. Step 2, we want to look at the sodium to calorie ratio. It's exactly 1-to-1. Step 3, the ingredients. The only ingredient is broccoli. Step 4, we want to look at the sugar. 2 times 4 calories is 8 calories. 8 calories from sugar divided by 20 calories total times 100% gives us 40% of our calories coming from sugar. But there's no sugar added. That's all intrinsic sugar to the broccoli. So that's quite all right. Then our last step, carbohydrate to fiber ratio. 4 divided by 2 is 2. It's well under 5, puts us into that green part of the plate. You can eat this without limit. So let's finish up with just a local shopping tour. In our region, Kroger is one of the dominant grocery stores. When you go to Kroger, you can look for their Simple Truth organic foods, There might be a slight benefit to getting organic foods. However, they tend to have lower sodium, lower fat, so use these as comparisons to other items that you would normally be buying. Kroger, like most major chains, has its own variety of products like their seasonings. So right next to Mrs. Dash, you can find the Kroger brand, much less expensive, usually has identical ingredients. The bottle may even look similar, and it may actually be manufactured by the same people. Be cautious as well. Look for the sodium in those seasonings. For example, you want the garlic powder, not the garlic salt. Beware of hummus. Hummus can be very healthy, especially if you make it yourself and know exactly what's in it. But one of the common brands, Sabra, adds a lot of extra oil, which increases the caloric density quite a bit. In our region, in some of the Kroger stores, there is Oasis brand hummus. It's out of Toledo, Ohio. If your store doesn't have it, if you ask for it, they might be able to get it for you. They add no extra fat beyond what's there in the ingredients normally. Many hummuses are going to be higher in fat content because of the tahini, which is in essence a whole food. It's the ground sesame seeds, but you want to avoid the calories coming from the oils like olive oil. For snacks, I usually recommend fruit, cut up veggies, things like that, but sometimes we just need a convenient, quick snack, something that we can carry in our purse or backpack or have at our desk at the office where it's not going to perish like fruit would. You can look for some of the Lara brand or Kind brand bars. Be sure to read the ingredients. Many of them have added salt, sugar, and fat. Look for the ones with just compressed whole foods. For example, this one in particular, apples, apricots, cashews, pineapple, and kale. They will be higher in fat overall because of the cashews, but generally they're a healthy snack. The Kind bars have a similar thing. Apple, strawberry, cherry, chia seeds in this one. Be sure you check the label on the ones that you're buying. Not all the bars produced by Kind and Lara are so healthy. Have you thought about going to Big Lots for groceries? You might be surprised at what you find there. They have Kashi Goleen cereal. If you like cold cereal, that's one of the better options. They have whole grain pasta, Mrs. Dash, and a line of granola. Again, read the labels to be sure you're aware of the additives. They also have Bob's Red Mill products. These are some multi-grain breakfast cereals, some soup mixes ready to go. You might want to check these out if you've not tried them before. Aldi is another grocery store chain in our region. You can find some good things there. They have dried fruit, their own line of spices. You can get unsweetened applesauce and no salt added tomato products. Also in our region are many Dollar General stores, Walmarts, and Giant Eagles. These all will have an assortment of healthier options. Dollar General is a little bit more limited. Some of the more rural Dollar Generals actually have frozen vegetables. If you find that as you go into the store, you just can't avoid picking up those donuts or cookies, then maybe you should shop online, where you can order exactly what you want, drive up to the curb and have them loaded into your car for you. That avoids the temptation of going down the aisles. Most of the grocery stores offer online shopping options for you. Amazon also offers some of these products, such as Tommy tomato products, TVP from Bob's Red Mill, and nutritional yeast from Bragg's. In our region in Southeast Ohio, we have some bulk food options as well. In Athens, there's the pharmacy. We also have another bulk food store in Athens. In Parkersburg, there's Mother Earth. These have very similar products. Not everything in the store is healthy, even though it's labeled health food, but you can find some spices, some pasta, nuts, granola mixes, a wide variety of legumes and whole grains that you wouldn't find in the regular grocery store. And one of my favorites is you can grind your own peanut butter without salt. You can also get nutritional yeast and textured vegetable protein. Are you ready for health? As you consider how to apply what you've learned in this module, I would encourage you to set some goals. Begin by reading the products you have at home. You can take your time, you can do it intermittently, You can also go online and check out the labels of what you want to buy before you go to the grocery store. And most of us keep buying the same things over and over again. So once you decide which of the items is a better choice, you won't need to read the labels every time. So you might want to go through some of these goals, pick out some that make some sense to you. Are you ready for health?